Jessica, Rayne, and Emily Foster were inseparable until one vanished without a trace, and the other began flirting with the very detectives searching for her. What looked like heartbreak turned into something far more sinister, exposing a twisted betrayal buried beneath years of friendship in a shallow grave. Jessica, Rayne, and Emily Foster had always been the kind of friends people envied. From childhood to adulthood, they shared a bond that looked unbreakable. Growing up in the quiet, well-kept town of Maple Creek, they were constantly seen together. Bikes as kids, working on school projects as teens, and later celebrating milestones as young women. On social media, their lives were perfectly intertwined. Their feeds were filled with birthday tributes, beach trips, brunches, and matching Halloween costumes. They referred to each other as soul sisters, and to anyone watching from the outside there was no sign of trouble. Jessica was the bolder of the two, always dressed in the latest fashion, always ready for the next big thing. Emily, softer and more grounded, preferred staying in, reading, or helping out at the animal clinic where she worked. But despite their different personalities, they fit together like puzzle pieces, or so it seemed. Beneath the surface, tension had begun to build. Jessica had recently ended a rocky relationship with her longtime boyfriend, Brandon Mills. The breakup was messy, full of public arguments and vague Instagram posts hinting at betrayal. Jessica leaned heavily on Emily during those weeks, calling her late at night, showing up at her apartment unannounced, crying about how no one truly understood her. Emily, ever the loyal friend, comforted her without question. But within a month, Brandon started spending time with Emily at first. It was innocent. He'd stop by the clinic to say hello, or they'd bump into each other at the grocery store. But soon it was clear they were growing close. A few mutual friends noticed and mentioned it casually to Jessica. That was when everything started to change. Jessica's mood shifted. She became more distant, often canceling plans or showing up late, distracted and agitated. When she did see Emily, her warmth felt forced, her smile a little too perfect. Emily, possibly sensing the discomfort, tried to smooth things over, insisting that nothing romantic was happening. But Jessica wasn't convinced. It wasn't just Brandon. Emily seemed to be getting more attention over all new friends, a promotion at work, even more likes on her posts. Jessica, used to being at the center of attention, felt sidelined. The balance in their friendship had tipped. Still, when Jessica invited Emily over one evening for wine and to clear the air, no one suspected anything was off. Not Emily, not their friends, not even Emily's younger brother, who had seen her leave the clinic that day in a good mood. Mentioning she had plans with Jessica, that would be the last time anyone saw Emily alive. To those who didn't know better, they were just two best friends spending another casual evening together. No one could have guessed that under the glow of candlelight and laughter, something much darker was brewing, something final. And when Emily didn't show up for work the next day, and her phone went straight to voicemail, the facade of the perfect friendship shattered, revealing a story far more disturbing than anyone in Maple Creek could have imagined. Emily's disappearance hit Maple Creek like a wave of cold air in Springside, and chilling, and impossible to ignore. She had always been dependable. She showed up to work early, responded to messages within minutes, and never missed appointments. So when she failed to appear for her morning shift at the animal clinic, her co-workers were immediately concerned. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Texts were delivered but never read. By noon, her supervisor contacted Emily's family. Her brother, who had spoken to her just the night before, was the first to sound the alarm. The search for Emily began that same afternoon. Her car, a small blue hatchback, was discovered 2 miles from her apartment near a public park entrance. It was unlocked, her purse still on the passenger seat, phone on the dashboard, and keys in the ignition. Nothing appeared stolen or out of place. But the eerie stillness of the scene sent a chill down the spine of every officer who responded. People don't vanish like that. Not in Maple Creek. Not someone like Emily. News of her disappearance spread quickly. Flyers were printed overnight and plastered on telephone poles, gas station windows, and bus stops. A missing persons post went viral on social media. Friends and strangers joined search parties that combed through parks, wooded trails, and even drainage ditches. The local community center became a base for volunteers. Local businesses donated food, water, and printing services. For a small town, Maple Creek rallied fast, and no one was more visible during the effort than Jessica Rayne. Jessica arrived early and stayed late. She coordinated routes, handed out bottled water, and hugged strangers who cried. Local reporters often caught her on camera, speaking about how much she loved Emily, how close they were, how much she hoped for her safe return. At first, everyone that admired her strength. But after a few days, some began to notice how Jessica seemed almost too composed. She laughed easily, told charming stories about her and Emily's past adventures, and frequently chatted with the lead investigator, sometimes twirling her hair or brushing imaginary dust off his jacket. At a press conference, she wore a full face of makeup and designer sunglasses, posing stiffly beside Emily's family, who were visibly exhausted and distraught. Online speculation took off. Threads on true crime forums and Reddit started dissecting Jessica's behavior. Was she just trying to cope in her own way, or was something darker at play? Her constant involvement began to feel less like concern and more like performance. People noticed how she inserted herself into every interview, every photo, every decision. Some searchers quietly admitted they felt uncomfortable around her. One even claimed she was more interested in what the reporters were asking than where Emily might be. Behind the scenes, detectives were also paying attention. Jessica had become a frequent presence at the investigation center, always asking questions, always volunteering details. She mentioned things only someone close to Emily or the scene would know. It was subtle, but the pattern was there. The friend who seemed most heartbroken was slowly becoming the investigation's most curious subject, and Emily's silence was beginning to sound more like a scream. 3 weeks after Emily Foster's disappearance, the investigation had reached a standstill. Leads had dried up, tips led nowhere, and public interest had started to fade. Volunteers no longer gathered in large groups, and even the posters lining Maple Creek's streets began to curl at the edges under the early summer sun. But then, everything changed with a single phone call. An anonymous tip came in to the local police station. The voice was calm, distorted by a cheap voice changer. The caller said they had seen suspicious activity near an abandoned construction site just outside town. There were no further details, no name, no follow-up, but something about the tone gave investigators pause. The site in question was known for its overgrown lots and half-finished foundations forgotten by developers, ignored by most locals. That evening, officers arrived quietly, bringing cadaver dogs and floodlights. It didn't take long. Behind a crumbling cement wall, hidden beneath broken boards and disturbed soil, the dogs stopped. Officers began digging. Just beneath the surface, they uncovered what appeared to be a shallow grave. The air turned heavy as the outline of a body emerged. The victim had been wrapped in a thin bedsheet face down, with arms folded unnaturally beneath her. Her clothing matched the description of what Emily had been wearing the night she disappeared. Confirmation came 2 days later through dental records. It was Emily. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the back of her skull. No defensive wounds, no signs of restraint. She hadn't seen it coming. Found beside her body were her phone and a delicate gold bracelet, one she had worn almost daily. But investigators quickly noticed something odd. The clasp on the bracelet had a faint smudge of fingerprint. It didn't belong to Emily. Tests began immediately. As the investigation intensified, detectives revisited the volunteer equipment logs from the early search days. Jessica Rayne had signed out a shovel and gloves from the community center's supply on the second day of Emily's disappearance. Unlike others, she never returned them. It had seemed unimportant at the time, easily overlooked. But with new information, they tracked her down. A search warrant was issued. Inside Jessica's car, officers found the missing shovel in the trunk. Hidden beneath a blanket, it had been cleaned thoroughly, but small amounts of dried soil clung to the metal handle where cleaning had failed. Forensic analysts tested the dirt and compared it to samples from the gravesite. It was a match down to the mineral composition. Jessica was called in for questioning. She arrived calm, composed, dressed immaculately. She smiled politely, laughed when appropriate, and maintained her innocence. She claimed the shovel must have been left by mistake. She said she hadn't been near the construction site in years. But her answers were practiced, too smooth, too controlled. Investigators had heard this type of confidence before, not from grieving friends, but from suspects trying to stay one step ahead. Jessica wasn't just linked to the crime scene, she was embedded in it. And now, for the first time, the mask she wore so carefully was beginning to slip. With physical evidence now pointing toward Jessica Rayne, investigators began digging deeper into her movements, her behavior, and her digital footprint. They reviewed every piece of surveillance available, every text, every social media post, and anything else that could place her near Emily on the night of the disappearance. What they found began to paint a much darker picture, one that contrasted sharply with the image Jessica had portrayed during those first emotional weeks. One of the key breakthroughs came from a gas station security camera. The footage showed Emily's blue car pulling into the lot just after 8:15 p.m. the night she vanished. The driver, later confirmed as Emily, stepped out and entered the store. Less than a minute later, another figure stepped out from the passenger side. Though the face wasn't clearly visible, the woman wore a bright red jacket with white stripes down the sleeves, an outfit identical to one Jessica had posted a selfie in earlier that evening. Investigators compared the video to a social media post and matched the shoes, the jacket, and even the way her hair was tied back. Jessica had claimed she hadn't seen Emily that night. The footage proved otherwise. Digging further into her phone records, police discovered that Jessica's and Emily's phones had remained in close proximity until just after midnight that same night. After that point, Emily's phone had stopped moving, while Jessica's location history showed her driving toward the edge of town, the same direction as the abandoned construction site. The next day, Jessica posted a cryptic quote on her Instagram story that read, "Sometimes people get what they deserve." It didn't receive much attention at the time. Now it was hard to ignore. The most chilling evidence came from Emily's phone itself. It had been buried with her, but once recovered and examined, forensic specialists were able to piece together its activity. In the hours after her death, several texts had been sent from her account to mutual friends, saying she was taking a break, feeling burned out, and needed time alone. The language was stiff, unlike her usual tone. The spelling was off in places. It felt impersonated. The person sending those messages had likely hoped to buy time. That person, investigators now believed, was Jessica. Further forensic analysis of the fingerprint found on Emily's bracelet confirmed their suspicion. It was Jessica's. What unsettled detectives most, however, wasn't just the evidence, it was Jessica's behavior during the investigation. Her eagerness to stay close to law enforcement no longer seemed like concern, it looked like manipulation. The way she lingered during interviews, laughed during tense moments, and leaned into conversations with detectives, all of it was now reinterpreted through the lens of guilt. She hadn't just lied. She had carefully constructed a version of herself that was cooperative, grief-stricken, and supportive. And while others searched forests and knocked on doors, she had smiled, posed, and flirted, staying just close enough to the investigation to monitor its progress, all while hiding in plain sight. The act was unraveling. The moment Jessica Rayne was arrested, the illusion she had so carefully maintained collapsed. Gone was the polished, confident woman who had charmed reporters and comforted grieving friends. In the mugshot released to the public, she looked almost unrecognizable, hollow, and stripped of her usual poise. The arrest shocked the community. Even those who had started to suspect her, many still couldn't believe that the same woman, who had led search parties and wept for the cameras, could have committed such a brutal, calculated crime. The charges were severe: first-degree murder, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and misuse of a communication device. As investigators laid out the timeline, the full horror of what had happened became clear. Jessica had not acted in a moment of rage. This had been planned. She had lured Emily over with the promise of reconciliation. They had likely shared drinks, maybe even laughed. Then, at some point that night, Jessica struck Emily from behind with a heavy glass sculpture that sat on her bookshelf, an object later found with traces of blood and hair embedded in its base. After the murder, Jessica cleaned the scene, wrapped Emily's body in a bedsheet, and transported her to the abandoned construction site. She buried her best friend in a shallow grave, covered it with debris, and returned home as if nothing had happened. In the following days, she impersonated Emily through text messages and social media posts, misleading everyone into thinking Emily had simply left town for a while. She joined search efforts to stay ahead of suspicion and even tried to charm investigators in what now looked like a twisted game of control. During trial preparations, prosecutors revealed chilling notes found in a deleted folder on Jessica's laptop. They contained entries resembling diary-like thoughts, venting about betrayal, abandonment, and being overshadowed. One sentence stood out: "If she wants everything I have, then she can have what's coming to her too." The phrase sent a wave of discomfort through the courtroom during the preliminary hearings. Jessica showed no remorse. Even in court, she appeared detached. She didn't cry when the jury viewed photos of the grave. She didn't flinch when forensic experts described the injury that ended Emily's life. Instead, she watched coldly, her expression unreadable. When asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she declined. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Emily's family refused media interviews after the trial. They quietly held a memorial in their backyard, planting a dogwood tree in her honor. Her mother reportedly stopped speaking for weeks. Her brother moved out of state, unable to remain in a town filled with memories of his sister and the woman who killed her. Jessica's story became the subject of podcasts, documentaries, and debates. How could someone so close, so trusted, turn so violently? How could she smile through it all? Maple Creek would never forget. Not the laughter that masked a lie, not the betrayal hidden behind a best friend's hug, and certainly not the woman who buried her secret beneath the soil then tried to charm her way out of justice.